Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is David Hawksworth, and I need to tell you what really happened at Seneca Rocks in July 1966. I was a park ranger there for 8 years, and at 31, I was the youngest head ranger in our district. People trusted me because I had a good eye for details and never made things up. Before I became a ranger, I flew planes in the Air Force. That training helped me spot things others missed. When hikers said they saw strange aircraft, I usually figured out it was just a military jet flying too low, or maybe a helicopter practicing maneuvers. I had perfect eyesight and knew every type of plane that flew over West Virginia. Seneca Rocks was my territory. Those huge limestone cliffs that shot straight up 900 feet from the valley floor. The rocks looked like giant stone fingers reaching toward the sky. Rock climbers came from all over to test themselves against those walls. July was always our busiest time, with climbers arriving every day to tackle the harder routes. The place had history too. Local Seneca tribes considered it sacred ground, and during the war, the Germans kept prisoners at a camp just a few miles down the valley. Old-timers still talked about strange lights they'd seen dancing around the rock faces at night, but I figured that was just campfire stories. That summer started normal enough. Hot days, afternoon thunderstorms that rolled in like clockwork, and plenty of climbers to keep an eye on. The access road was just a narrow strip of asphalt winding through thick forest. Once you got to the rocks, you were pretty much cut off from the world. The nearest real town was hours away. I lived in a small ranger station at the base of the formation with my partner Frank Winters. Frank handled the radio equipment and weather monitoring. He was 10 years older than me, steady and practical. If something couldn't be measured or explained, Frank didn't want to or about it. The first strange report came on a Tuesday morning. A group of college kids had been camping near the base of the North Peak when they heard something big moving through the trees after midnight. They said it sounded like huge wings beating against the branches, followed by a noise they described as like a baby crying, but deeper. I went out to check their campsite and found some broken branches about 15 feet off the ground. Could have been a bear, I figured, though bears don't usually climb that high. The kids packed up and left that same morning, even though they'd paid for 3 more nights. 2 days later, another climber named Mike Torres came to my station looking pale and shaken. He'd been making his way up the east face route when something cast a shadow over him. When he looked up, he saw what he swore was a bird with wings wider than his car. He said it perched on the very top of the rock for maybe 30 seconds, then flew off toward the south. I've been climbing for 12 years, Mike told me. I know every bird that lives in these mountains. This thing was bigger than an eagle, bigger than anything I've ever seen. I checked the area where Mike had been climbing and found scratch marks in the rock. They were deep gouges like something with very sharp claws had dug into the limestone. The marks were fresh, white stone showing through where the surface had been scraped away. Frank thought the scratches might have come from climbing equipment, but they were too high up and in places no climber would go. We measured them and found they were about 6 inches long and spaced like fingers on a giant hand. That weekend brought more reports. A family from Ohio said their dog had whimpered all night and refused to leave their tent. When morning came, they found their campfire scattered and their food coolers moved 20 feet from where they had left them. The coolers were heavy. Took 2 people to carry them, but nothing was missing. I started keeping a log of all the weird incidents. The pattern bothered me. Things happened. At night, animals acted scared, and people described feeling like they were being watched from above. But I still thought there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe a big owl was nesting somewhere up in the rocks, or a sick bear was wandering around causing trouble. The weather that July was stranger than usual, too. Our compass sometimes spun when we tried to take readings near the North Peak. The radio crackled with static during the evening hours, making it hard to reach the main ranger station. Frank checked all our equipment twice and couldn't find anything wrong with it. On July 15th, everything changed. That morning started quiet, with just a thin layer of fog hanging around the base of the rocks. Frank was inside updating weather reports when I heard a car engine struggling up our access road. A few minutes later, a beat-up Chevy truck pulled into our parking area. The driver was a woman about my age with short brown hair and hands marked by rope burns. Definitely a serious climber. She introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell from Pittsburgh and said she'd come to attempt a solo climb of the West Face. Solo climbing was dangerous, but she seemed to know what she was doing. "I've been planning this route for 2 years," she told me. "I know every handhold and ledge on that wall." I gave her the usual safety talk and made her promise to check in by radio every 2 hours. She had good equipment and plenty of experience. If anyone could handle a solo climb on our most difficult face, it would be someone like Sarah. She started up the wall just after sunrise, moving steady and sure. I watched through binoculars as she worked her way up the first 100 feet. Her technique was perfect. No wasted motion, every placement solid. At her first check-in, she sounded confident and strong. Around noon, the fog started rolling in thicker than I'd seen it in years. It came up from the valley below like a gray blanket, swallowing the lower sections of the rock. Sarah's voice on the radio began cutting in and out, mixed with bursts of static that made my ears ring. "Can barely through this fog," her voice crackled. "Something wrong with visibility." I tried calling back but got nothing but that sharp static. Frank came outside and we both strained to see up the cliff face, but the fog had turned everything gray and shapeless. That's when we heard it. A sound like nothing I'd experienced before. It started as a low humming, almost musical, then rose to something between a scream and a roar. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the rock walls and through the fog. Every bird in the forest went silent. Even the insects stopped their buzzing. The only sound was that terrible cry, rising and falling like a siren. Frank grabbed my arm. "What the hell was that?" Before I could answer, Sarah's voice burst through the radio static, high and panicked. "There's something up here with me, something big. Oh God, it's looking right at me." Then the radio went dead. The fog lifted as suddenly as it had come, rolling away like someone had pulled a curtain. Frank and I grabbed climbing gear and started up the emergency rescue route, moving as fast as we could on the steep rock. We found Sarah on a narrow ledge about 600 feet up the wall. She was sitting with her back against the stone, staring straight ahead with empty, burned-looking eyes. Her climbing rope hung loose beside her, cut clean through as if someone had sliced it with a razor. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was her eyes. They were open, but the pupils were completely white, like someone had shined a bright light directly into them and burned away everything inside. "Sarah!" I called out, but she didn't respond. When I reached the edge and touched her shoulder, her skin was ice cold. She'd been dead for hours, even though we'd heard her voice on the radio just minutes before. Frank checked her gear while I tried to figure out what had happened. Her equipment was in perfect condition, no signs of a fall or equipment failure. The cut in her rope was clean and straight, impossible to make with normal climbing tools. "Dave," Frank said quietly, pointing up at the rock face above us. "Look at this." Carved into the limestone, about 10 feet over Sarah's body, was a symbol I'd never seen before. It looked like a pair of wings spread wide, with 2 perfect circles where eyes would be. The carving was fresh, white stone showing through like it had been made that same day. As we prepared Sarah's body for the rescue team, I kept feeling like something was watching us from above. Every time I looked up at the higher ledges, I saw nothing but empty rock and sky. But the feeling never went away. The medical examiner later said Sarah had died of acute cardiac arrest, but couldn't explain the condition of her eyes. The official report listed it as a climbing accident, despite the cut rope and the impossible timeline. That night, Frank and I sat in our station going over everything that had happened. Neither of us could make sense of it, but we both knew Sarah Mitchell had encountered something up on that cliff face, something that didn't belong in our world. "Maybe we should request a transfer," Frank said, staring out the window at the dark outline of the rocks. I almost agreed with him. but part of me needed to understand what had killed Sarah. I owed her that much. The next week brought 3 more climbing parties to Seneca Rocks, despite news of Sarah's accident spreading through the climbing community. Rock climbers are a stubborn bunch. The more dangerous a route seems, the more some of them want to try it. I started sleeping poorly, waking up at every small sound outside the ranger station. Frank installed extra lights around our building and kept the radio on all night, scanning FOMO, or any unusual activity. We took turns watching the cliff faces through binoculars, looking for anything that didn't belong. On July 22nd, a group of 4 climbers from Virginia set up camp near the base of the east face. They were experienced mountaineers, the kind who'd tackled peaks in Colorado and Alaska. Their leader, a guy named Tom Barrett, had been climbing for 20 years and didn't scare easily. Around midnight, Tom came pounding on our door. "There's something on the rocks," he said, breathing hard. "Something huge just sitting on top of the North Peak." Frank and I grabbed flashlights and followed Tom outside. He pointed up at the highest point of the formation, nearly 900 feet above us. "Right there on the very top. It's been sitting there for 10 minutes, not moving." I raised my binoculars and adjusted the focus. At first I saw nothing but dark rock against the star-filled sky. Then something shifted, and I caught sight of an outline that made my blood freeze. It was shaped like a man, but much larger, maybe 7 feet tall. 2 enormous wings stretched out from its shoulders, easily 15 feet from tip to tip. Where its head should be, I saw 2 glowing red dots that seemed to pulse with their own light. "Frank," I whispered, handing him the binoculars. "Tell me what you see." Frank looked through the lenses for nearly a minute. When he lowered them, his face had gone completely pale. "That's not a bird," he said. "That's not any animal I've ever seen." The 3 of us stood there watching as the thing sat motionless on the peak. It seemed to be looking down at us, those red eyes focused on our small group. Then, without any warning, it spread its wings wider and launched itself into the air. It didn't fly the way birds do, with flapping wings and visible effort. Instead, it glided silently through the darkness, moving in a straight line toward the south. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the forest beyond the rocks. Tom's climbing partners packed up their gear that same night and drove back to Virginia. Tom stayed 1 more day, convinced he could capture proof of what we'd seen. He set up cameras and motion detectors around his campsite, determined to document the creature. The next morning, we found his camp completely destroyed. His tent was shredded, his equipment scattered across a 100-yard area. The cameras were smashed, their film exposed to daylight. Tom was nowhere to be found. We searched for 6 hours before discovering him about half a mile into the forest, sitting under a tree with his knees pulled up to his chest. He was alive, but wouldn't speak. His eyes had the same burned-out look we'd seen on Sarah Mitchell, and his hair had turned completely white overnight. The state police took Tom to a hospital in Charleston, where doctors said he was suffering from extreme psychological trauma. He never climbed again, and as far as I know, he never talked about what happened to him that night. Word started spreading that Seneca Rocks was cursed. Climbing magazines ran stories about the deadly summer and advised people to stay away until the situation was resolved. But we kept getting visitors. Not climbers now, but researchers and curiosity seekers who'd heard rumors about a monster in the mountains. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived on July 28th, driving a van full of scientific equipment. She was a professor from West Virginia University who studied unexplained phenomena and wanted to investigate the recent incidents. She set up electromagnetic sensors around the base of the rocks and brought cameras that could see in infrared light. "I've researched similar cases across Appalachia," she told Frank and me. "There's a pattern to these sightings. They always happen near places with unusual geological features. Seneca Rocks sits on top of several underground fault lines that create electromagnetic anomalies." That first night with Dr. Vasquez, nothing happened. Her equipment regime steered normal readings and the creature didn't appear. But on the second night, everything went crazy. Around 2 a.m., her sensors started beeping wildly. The electromagnetic readings spiked higher than her equipment could measure. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in just a few minutes, and a thick fog rolled in from nowhere. Then we heard the sound, that same musical humming that had filled the air the day Sarah died. It seemed to come from inside the rocks themselves, vibrating through the stone and into our bones. Dr. Vasquez's infrared cameras captured something I'll never forget. A massive heat signature moving along the cliff faces, too big to be any known animal. It climbed straight up the vertical rock without using handholds or ledges, moving like gravity didn't affect it. When the creature reached the top of the formation, it spread its wings and turned toward our location. Through the cameras, we watched as it launched itself into the air and glided directly over our heads. That's when it spoke to me. Not with words, but with thoughts that appeared in my mind like someone else's voice. The message was clear and terrifying. The bridge will fall, many will die. You must warn them. Images flashed through my consciousness. A suspension bridge over a wide river. Cars packed with people heading home from work. Steel cables snapping one by one until the entire structure collapsed into dark water. I saw the date. December 15th, 1967. I saw the location. Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The creature circled overhead once more, then disappeared into the southern darkness. Dr. Vasquez's equipment slowly returned to normal readings, but none of us slept for the rest of the night. In the morning, she packed up her gear with shaking hands. "I've never recorded readings like that," she said. "Whatever that thing is, it's not from our world. It exists in some space between dimensions, and it's trying to communicate something important." Before she left, Dr. Vasquez gave me her contact information and made me promise to call if the creature appeared. Again. "That vision you had about the bridge," she said. "Don't ignore it. These entities sometimes show us things that haven't happened yet. Warnings we're supposed to act on." August brought more sightings as word spread through the region about the Senica Rocks monster. Local newspapers sent reporters who camped out hoping to get photographs. Television crews arrived from Charleston and Pittsburgh. Most went home disappointed, but a few claimed to have seen red eyes watching them from the cliff tops at night. The attention made my job harder. I spent more time dealing with reporters and curiosity seekers than actual park duties. Frank talked constantly about requesting a transfer, but I felt responsible for understanding what was happening. Sarah Mitchell and Tom Barrett deserved better than having their experiences dismissed as hallucinations. On August 15th, the creature made contact again. I was alone at the ranger station, updating incident reports, when every piece of electronic equipment in the building started malfunctioning. The radio filled with static, the lights flickered, and my watch stopped working. Then the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Outside, a familiar fog was rolling up from the valley, thicker than ever before. I grabbed binoculars and stepped onto the porch, scanning the rock faces for any sign of movement. The creature was standing on a ledge maybe 200 feet away, close enough that I could see it clearly even without the binoculars. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. It stood 7 feet tall on powerful legs that ended in clawed feet. Its body was covered in dark gray feathers that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The wings, folded against its back, were massive, each one larger than my entire body. But the worst part was its head. Where a normal animal would have fur or feathers, the thing's head was smooth and pale, almost human-like but stretched wrong. Its eyes glowed with deep red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. When it looked at me, I felt that light burning into my thoughts. "You have seen the vision," the voice said in my mind. "The bridge will fall on December 15th, 1967. 46 people will die unless you act." More images flooded my consciousness, clearer and more detailed than before. I saw the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to Ohio. I watched cars and trucks crossing during evening rush hour, headlights cutting through December darkness. Then I witnessed the collapse. Suspension cables snapping like rubber bands, the roadway buckling and twisting, vehicles tumbling into the cold Ohio River. But now I also saw technical details. Stress fractures in the I-bar suspension system, metal fatigue from 40 years of use, a critical failure point that engineers could identify and repair if they knew where to look. Why me? I thought. Why are you showing me this? You have the knowledge to understand. You have the credibility to be believed. You are the one who can prevent this tragedy." The creature spread its wings wide, and I saw detailed images of my own past. My Air Force training in aircraft maintenance. My experience investigating mechanical failures. My reputation as the reliable ranger who never made false reports. "Your sister lives in Point Pleasant," the voice continued. "She works 3 blocks from the bridge. She crosses it twice every day." My heart stopped. Jennifer, my younger sister, had moved to Point Pleasant 2 years earlier when she got married. She had a job at the courthouse downtown and lived on the Ohio side of the river. The creature was right. She crossed that bridge every morning and evening. "How do I convince anyone this is real?" I asked silently. Instead of words, the creature showed me more images, engineering reports, inspection schedules, the specific type of metal fatigue that would cause the failure. It gave me technical language that only a trained aircraft mechanic would know, details about stress analysis and structural failure patterns that would impress professional engineers. "You will find a way," it said. "The warning has been given." The creature launched itself from the ledge and glided over the ranger station. As it passed overhead, I felt one final mental contact. Not words this time, but something like gratitude mixed with ancient sadness. Then it was gone, disappearing into the southern forest. I stood on the porch for a long time trying to process what had happened. The fog lifted, the electronic equipment returned to normal, and the forest sounds resumed. But my mind was full of technical details about bridge construction and metal fatigue that I definitely hadn't known an hour earlier. That night I called Jennifer. "Dave," she said, happy to hear from me. "How are things at the Rocks? I heard on the news you've been having some excitement with monster sightings." "Jen, I need you to listen carefully. That bridge you cross every day, the Silver Bridge, it's going to collapse. I know how crazy this sounds, but you need to find another way to get to work." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Dave, are you feeling okay? You sound strange." I tried to explain without mentioning the creature, talking about structural concerns and inspection reports that should be reviewed. But Jennifer wasn't an engineer, and my sudden expertise in bridge construction only made me sound more unhinged. "Maybe you should take some time off," she said gently. "This summer has been really stressful for you." After I hung up, I realized the magnitude of what I was facing. How do you convince people that a giant winged creature had given you specific engineering data about a future disaster? How do you explain knowledge you couldn't possibly have obtained through normal means? But I had to try. 46 lives were at stake, including my sister's. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. I wrote letters to the West Virginia Department of Transportation explaining my concerns about the Silver Bridge. I contacted engineering firms, bridge inspectors, and safety officials. I used every bit of technical knowledge the creature had given me, presenting it as analysis based on my aircraft maintenance background. Most people ignored my letters. A few responded politely, assuring me that the bridge was inspected regularly and met all safety standards. One engineer from Charleston actually drove to Point Pleasant to look at the structure, but he found nothing obviously wrong. In November, I took a week of vacation time and drove to Point Pleasant myself. I walked across the Silver Bridge, studying every joint and cable. With the creature's knowledge in my head, I could see the stress patterns in the metal, the tiny fractures that were growing larger with each passing day. I met with the mayor, the police chief, and anyone else who would listen. Most treated me like a well-meaning but misguided outsider. A few suggested I needed psychological help. Nobody took action based on my warnings. On December 14th, one day before the creature's predicted disaster, I made a final, desperate attempt. I called in a bomb threat. It was the only way I could think of to close the bridge without revealing the source of my information. I disguised my voice and told the police dispatcher that explosives had been planted on the Silver Bridge, set to detonate during evening rush hour. The bridge was closed immediately. Bomb squads searched for hours but found nothing. Traffic was rerouted to other crossings, causing massive delays but keeping people away from the doomed structure. At 4:58 p.m. on December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed. I was standing on the Ohio riverbank when it happened, watching through binoculars as the final stress fracture propagated through the I-bar suspension system. The entire span fell into the river in less than 30 seconds, exactly as the creature had shown me. But instead of cars full of people, only empty asphalt tumbled into the dark water. The bomb threat had saved every life that would have been lost. The official investigation blamed metal fatigue and inadequate inspection procedures. The bridge had been built in 1928 and was indeed overdue for major structural review. No one ever connected the collapse to my warnings, and the bomb threat was dismissed as an unrelated prank. I was transferred to a desk job in Washington, D.C. the following month. My superiors said the stress of the summer's events had affected my judgment, making me unsuitable for field work. My official file contains references to psychological instability and obsessive behavior regarding public safety issues. Frank got the transfer he'd wanted and now works at a park in Colorado. We exchange Christmas cards, but never talk about what we experienced at Seneca Rocks. Jennifer moved away from Point Pleasant after the bridge collapse, spooked by how close she'd come to being on the bridge that evening. She never knew that her brother's crazy phone calls had been the first link in a chain of events that saved her life. I spent 15 years working in Washington, becoming an expert on infrastructure safety and disaster prevention. I published papers on structural failure analysis and consulted on bridge inspection protocols. The knowledge the creature gave me became the foundation for a career dedicated to preventing exactly the kind of tragedy I'd witnessed in my visions. I retired in 1982 and moved to a small town in Oregon, far from any unusual geological formations. But sometimes, on clear nights when the stars are bright, I still look up at the sky and wonder if the creature is still out there, watching over other bridges and buildings and giving warnings to people who are willing to listen. The Mothman sighs. Tings never stopped completely. Every few years, reports surface from different parts of Appalachia, always near locations with electromagnetic anomalies, always shortly before disasters strike. Most people dismiss them as folklore or hallucinations. But I know better. There are things in this world that exist beyond our normal understanding, entities that move between dimensions and carry messages we're supposed to hear. The trick is recognizing the warnings when they come and having the courage to act on them, even when nobody believes you. Sarah Mitchell died because she was in the wrong place when the creature was trying to communicate its message. Tom Barrett was traumatized because he encountered something his mind couldn't process. But maybe their suffering served a purpose. Maybe it brought attention to Seneca Rocks at exactly the moment when someone with the right background and connections needed to receive an important warning. I've never seen the creature again, but sometimes I dream about those glowing red eyes and that ancient, sad presence. In my dreams, it's still out there, watching over bridges and buildings and fault lines, waiting to warn the next person who's willing to listen. The Silver Bridge that collapsed was rebuilt within 5 years with modern engineering and safety standards. It still carries traffic between West Virginia and Ohio, and as far as I know, it's never had any structural problems. But I made sure my sister found a job on the same side of the river where she lives. My name is Bobby Cliffwalker, and I've been a ranger in Pisgah National Forest for 18 years. People always ask about my last name. It's Scots-Irish, means one who walks dangerous paths. My Cherokee friends say it fits me perfectly. After what happened in September of 1987, I think they're right. I've seen plenty of accidents in these mountains, broken bones, heart attacks, hikers lost for days. But nothing prepared me for what I found at Linville Gorge that morning. Nothing could have. The gorge is the deepest canyon east of the Mississippi River, 2,000 feet of sheer quartzite cliffs that drop straight down to the Linville River. It's beautiful and deadly. The Cherokee have stories about it, old legends about screaming spirits and cursed warriors. I never paid much attention to those tales. I was wrong not to. It started with a missing persons report. 4 rock climbers from Charlotte hadn't returned from their weekend trip. Their families called Monday morning when they didn't show up for work. The wives were crying on the phone, begging me to find their husbands alive. I hiked down to the last place they'd camped, a spot called Table Rock, where the cliff juts out like a giant shelf. Their tents were still there, food untouched, sleeping bags neat and tidy. But their climbing gear was gone. I followed the trail markers they'd left, little pieces of orange tape tied to trees. The path led to a section of cliff face that dropped straight down for about 800 feet. This was expert-level climbing territory, vertical walls that would challenge even seasoned pros. That's where I found their gear. It was arranged in a perfect spiral pattern on a ledge about 50 feet down the cliff face. Ropes, harnesses, metal clips, called carabiners, all laid out in a neat circle, but no sign of the men who'd brought them there. I rappelled down to check it out, using my own equipment. The gear looked brand new, but something was wrong with it. The ropes were frayed at the ends, like they'd been cut with a razor. The metal hardware was corroded and rusty, even though the weather had been bone dry for weeks. As I examined the equipment, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A human scream, distant but clear, echoing up from somewhere deep in the gorge. Then another scream, from a different direction. Then another. The sounds bounced off the cliff walls, creating an eerie chorus that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I'd worked mountain rescues for years. I knew what people sounded like when they were hurt, scared, or dying. These screams were different. They were full of pure terror, the kind of fear that strips away everything human and leaves only animal panic. I grabbed my radio and called base camp. "This is Bobby at Linville Gorge. I need a full search and rescue team out here now. We've got missing climbers, and I'm hearing distress calls from multiple locations." The radio crackled with static. "Bobby, this is dispatch. We're showing clear weather and no atmospheric disturbance. Are you sure you're hearing human voices?" I was about to answer when I heard it again. A long, wailing scream that seemed to go on forever. It was so loud it made my ears ring. So full of agony, it made me want to run. But I had a job to do. "I'm sure," I told dispatch. "Send everyone you've got." As I packed up the abandoned climbing gear, I noticed something else. Carved into the rock face, almost hidden by moss and weather stains, was a series of symbols. They looked old, maybe ancient. Cherokee markings, though I couldn't read them. The screaming continued as I climbed back up to the main trail. Multiple voices, all male, all terrified. They seemed to be calling for help, but the words were distorted by the echoes. Sometimes I could most make out names. "Dave! Help me! Oh God, help me!" I knew those names. Dave Morrison was one of the missing climbers. By the time the rescue team arrived, the screaming had stopped. The gorge was silent except for the sound of wind through the trees and water rushing over rocks far below. My partner, Maria Eaglefeather, was leading the team. She's Cherokee. Works as an archaeologist when she's not doing search and rescue. Smart woman, knows these mountains better than anyone. "What do we have, Bobby?" she asked, checking her equipment. 4 missing climbers, ages 25 to 30. Experienced guys from Charlotte. Found their camp intact, but their climbing gear arranged in a pattern down on the cliff face. And Maria... I paused, not sure how to explain what I'd heard. There were screams, human screams, coming from all over the gorge. She looked at me with those dark eyes that never missed anything. What kind of screams? Terror. Pure terror. Like something was... I stopped myself. It sounded crazy even to me. Like something was what, Bobby? Like something was hunting them. We split into 2 teams to search the gorge. Maria took the north face while I headed south with 2 other rangers. The September heat was brutal, even in the shade of the cliffs. Sweat poured down my back as we rappelled into the canyon. The Linville River runs fast and cold at the bottom, fed by mountain springs and last week's storms. We searched along the banks first, looking for bodies that might have been swept downstream. The water was clear enough to see the bottom, but we found nothing. It was Maria who found the first one. Her voice came over the radio around 2 in the afternoon, tight with control but shaking underneath. Bobby, you need to get over here. North face, about 300 feet down from Devil's Chimney. And Bobby, bring a body bag. I reached her location 20 minutes later. She was standing on a narrow ledge, staring down at something below. Her face was pale, and Maria Eaglefeather didn't rattle easily. What is it? I asked. She paused, inted down about 30 feet to another ledge. There was a body there, a man in climbing gear. But something was wrong with the scene. The body wasn't crumpled like it would be from a fall. It was positioned deliberately, arms spread wide, facing the cliff wall. That's Dave Morrison, Maria said quietly. I checked his wallet. But Bobby, look at the rock behind him. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. Carved into the cliff face was a hollow, like a shallow cave or burial niche. It was just the right size to hold a human head. The rock around it was stained dark with what looked like old blood. Cherokee burial site, Maria whispered. Very old, very sacred. The symbols you found earlier, they're warnings. They tell people to stay away from this place. As we rappelled down to examine the body, I noticed something else that made no sense. Dave Morrison's climbing rope was still attached to his harness, but it wasn't frayed or broken. It had been cut clean through, about 6 feet above where he lay. But the weird part was the cut end. It was hanging straight up in the air, like it was still attached to something invisible. I reached out to touch the rope, and that's when we heard it. A scream, so close it seemed to come from right beside us. Then another from a different direction. The same voices I'd heard that morning, calling out in terror and pain. Maria grabbed my arm. Bobby, we need to get out of here, now. But before we could move, the screaming changed. It became one voice, impossibly loud, coming from the burial niche in the cliff wall, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before, part human, part animal, part something else entirely. It was so loud it made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The sound seemed to be coming from inside the rock itself. Maria was shouting something, but I couldn't hear her over the screaming. The noise was overwhelming, like standing next to a jet engine. I felt blood running from my ears. Then, as suddenly as it started, the screaming stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard something that made us both freeze, the sound of falling rocks coming from above. Lots of rocks, getting closer. We pressed ourselves against the cliff face as a shower of stone rained down around us. Some of the chunks were big enough to kill if they hit you right. We hugged the rock wall and waited for it to stop. When the rockfall ended, Maria looked up at me with fear in her eyes. The burial niche, she said. Look at it. I turned to look at the hollow in the rock where the bloodstains were. My heart nearly stopped. There was something in there now, something that hadn't been there before. A human skull, ancient and yellowed with age, sat in the niche like it belonged there. The bone was cracked and weathered, but the most terrible thing was the eyes. The empty eye sockets glowed with a faint red light, like coals in a dying fire. And as we watched, frozen with terror, the skull's jaw began to move, up and down, like it was trying to speak, or scream. We have to go, Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. Right now. But as we started to climb back up, the skull let out another scream. This one was different, focused directly at us. The sound hit like a physical force, making me lose my grip on the rock face. I slipped, caught myself, then slipped again. My ears were ringing so badly I couldn't hear anything else. The world spun around me, and for a moment I thought I was going to fall. Maria grabbed my harness and held on until the vertigo passed. When my vision cleared, the skull was staring right at us. The red glow in its eye sockets had gotten brighter, and I could swear I saw intelligence there. Malevolent, ancient intelligence that knew exactly what it was doing. It's the screaming skull, Maria said, her voice tight with fear and recognition. Cherokee legend says a warrior was cursed to guard this burial site forever. Anyone who disturbs the sacred caves. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. We climbed as fast as we could, but I could feel the skull watching us the entire time. Even when we reached the top of the gorge and radioed for the coroner, I could still feel those burning eye sockets following my every move. Dave Morrison was dead, but whatever had killed him was very much alive, and it wasn't done hunting yet. By evening, we'd found all 4 bodies. Each one was positioned the same way, arms spread wide, facing the cliff wall where Cherokee burial niches had been carved into the rock. Each man had been found with his climbing rope cut clean through, the severed end hanging in midair like it was still attached to something invisible. The coroner's report made no sense. All 4 men had died from massive trauma to their inner ears. Their eardrums had been ruptured so violently that it caused brain hemorrhaging. But there were no external injuries, no signs they'd fallen or been struck by anything. "It's like someone screamed them to death," the coroner told me privately. "I've never seen anything like it." The rescue team had heard the screaming too. Every man on the crew reported hearing multiple voices calling for help from different parts of the gorge. But when we investigated, we found nothing. Just empty rock and shadows. As darkness fell, I decided to stay at base camp overnight. Something was wrong in the gorge, something that went beyond normal search and rescue work. The families deserved answers, and I was going to find them. Maria stayed too, against my better judgment. We set up camp on Table Rock, the same spot where the missing climbers had been staying. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see the cliff faces clearly. Around midnight, the screaming started again. This time it was different. Instead of the terrorized voices of the dead climbers, we heard something older, a pair. A sound that seemed to come from the earth itself, rising up from the depths of the gorge like the voice of an ancient god. The skull was screaming, and it was angry. Maria and I grabbed our flashlights and rappelling gear. Whatever was down there, we had to face it. People were dead, and that thing in the burial niche was responsible. "You don't understand," Maria said as we prepared our ropes. "In Cherokee tradition, that skull belongs to Tzul'kalu', a giant warrior who was cursed for disturbing sacred burial grounds. The legends say he was beheaded, but his spirit remained in his skull to guard the caves forever." "So how do we stop it?" I asked, checking my harness. "Traditional Cherokees say you can appease him with tobacco offerings and prayers. But Bobby, if the stories are true, he's been down there for centuries. He's not going to be reasonable." We rappelled down to the area where we'd found the bodies. The burial niche was glowing now, that red light from the skull's eye sockets casting eerie shadows on the rock walls. The screaming was constant, so loud we had to shout to hear each other. As we got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The skull wasn't just sitting in the niche anymore, it was floating 6 inches in front of the rock, hovering in midair with its jaw working constantly, producing that horrible screaming sound. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what surrounded it. Ravens. Hundreds of them, perched on every ledge and outcropping, their black eyes reflecting the red glow from the skull. They sat perfectly still, like they were waiting for orders. "Oh God," Maria whispered. "It controls them. It controls the birds." As if it heard her, the skull turned toward us. The screaming stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that was somehow worse than the noise. The ravens all turned their heads at the same time, fixing their dark eyes on us. Then the skull opened its mouth and spoke. The voice was like grinding stone, deep and ancient and full of hate. I couldn't understand the words, but Maria could. Her face went white as she listened. "What's it saying?" I asked. "It's angry about the climbers," she translated, her voice shaking. "They disturbed the burial caves, took artifacts. It says we're all going to die for their desecration." The skull's jaw snapped shut with a sound like breaking bones. The ravens took flight all at once, a black cloud that blotted out the moon. They circled us, cawing and diving, their claws raking at our faces and hands. I swung my flashlight like a club, trying to drive them off, but there were too many. They seemed to know exactly where to strike to cause the most damage, going for our eyes, our hands, the ropes that kept us from falling. Then the skull screamed again, and the ravens retreated. They didn't fly away, just pulled back to form a circle around us, waiting. The scream had been focused directly at us this time. My ears rang like church bells, and I felt blood running down the side of my neck. Maria was in worse shape. She'd caught the full force of the sound and was having trouble staying conscious. But the skull wasn't done with us yet. As we watched in horror, it began to rise higher into the air, floating up toward us with its jaw working constantly. The red glow from its eye sockets got brighter, and I could feel heat radiating from the ancient bone. When it spoke again, I could understand some of the words. It was speaking English now, or something close to it. "Defilers," it said, the voice like wind through a graveyard. "Thieves, you take what is sacred. You disturb the sleep of warriors." "We didn't take anything," I shouted over the ringing in my ears. "We're just trying to help." The skull's laughter was worse than its screaming. A sound like breaking glass mixed with the death rattle of a dying animal. "Help?" it said. "You help by joining the others. You help by feeding the guardian what it needs. Ravens began to circle tighter, and I realized we were trapped. The skull could command the birds, control the weather, maybe even the rocks themselves. Our ropes were our only way out, and I could see the ravens eyeing them hungrily. That's when Maria did something incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Tobacco," she said, holding it up so the skull could see. "Sacred tobacco, blessed by Cherokee elders. I offer it to Tzulkalu, guardian of the burial grounds." The skull stopped moving. The ravens went quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I honor the warrior," Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "I acknowledge his right to guard this sacred place. I ask for safe passage for myself and my companion." For a long moment, nothing happened. The skull hung motionless in the air, those burning eye sockets fixed on the small leather pouch in Maria's hands. Then, slowly, it began to sink back toward the burial niche. The skull settled back into its ancient resting place, but the red glow in its eye sockets remained. It was listening, considering Maria's offer. The ravens stayed perfectly still, waiting for their master's decision. "You speak the old words," the skull said, its voice softer now, but no less terrifying. "You know the proper ways. But knowledge alone does not wash away blood." Maria stepped closer to the burial niche, holding the tobacco pouch in both hands like an offering. I wanted to grab her and get us both out of there, but I could see this was our only chance. "The men who died," she said carefully. "They didn't know this was a sacred place. They were ignorant, not evil. Their deaths have honored your guardianship." The skull's jaw worked silently for a moment, like it was chewing on her words. The red glow flickered, dimmed slightly. "Ignorance," it said finally. "Always ignorance. For centuries, they come with their ropes and metal tools. They chip away at sacred stone. They steal from burial chambers. They wake the dead with their noise and disrespect." I could hear the ancient pain in its voice, the accumulated rage of hundreds of years spent watching people desecrate what it was bound to protect. "But you," the skull continued, turning its burning gaze on Maria, "you are of the people. You carry their blood, speak their tongue. You should have known better." "I did know," Maria admitted. "I've known about this place since I was a child, but I thought the old stories were just legends. I didn't believe—" "Didn't believe," the skull repeated, its voice rising to a shriek that made the ravens flutter nervously. "Like all of them, you stopped believing. You forgot your duties, abandoned your ancestors, let strangers defile what your people died to protect." The wind was picking up, howling through the gorge like a living thing. Storm clouds gathered overhead, blotting out the moon. Lightning flickered in the distance. "I'm sorry," Maria said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I failed in my duty to my ancestors. I failed to protect this sacred place. But I'm here now. I'm offering what I have." She held up the tobacco pouch again. "Sacred tobacco, blessed by elders of the Eastern Band. Blood tobacco, grown on land where Cherokee warriors died. I offer it freely, with respect and humility." The skull stared at her for what felt like hours. The storm was getting worse, rain beginning to fall in cold, hard drops. Lightning struck somewhere close by, the thunder rolling through the gorge like the voice of an angry god. Finally, the skull spoke. "The offering is acceptable," it said, "but offerings alone do not balance the scales. 4 men died because they disturbed sacred ground. 4 men's blood feeds the earth around these caves. What will you give to balance their deaths? I saw where this was heading and didn't like it. Maria, don't listen to it. We can climb out of here right now. But she was already aching into her backpack again, pulling out something I hadn't seen her pack, a knife, old and obviously ceremonial, with a bone handle carved in Cherokee symbols. My blood, she said, simply. Cherokee blood freely given to consecrate this place anew and bind the guardian to his duty. No, I said, moving toward her. Maria, you don't have to. The ravens erupted into motion, a black whirlwind that drove me back against the cliff face. Their claws and beaks tore at my clothes and skin, but they were careful not to do any serious damage. They wanted me alive to witness what came next. Maria drew the knife across her palm, letting her blood drip onto the rocks at the base of the burial niche. The skull watched intently as the red drops splashed on the ancient stone. I bind myself to this place, she said in Cherokee, then repeated it in English. I swear by my ancestors' blood to protect these burial grounds from desecration. I accept the duty that should have been mine from birth. The skull's eye sockets flared brighter, then began to dim. The red glow faded to orange, then yellow, then disappeared entirely. The ancient bone looked suddenly lifeless, just a skull in a hole in the rock. But its voice continued, fainter now, but still audible. The bargain is struck, it said. The blood debt is paid. The guardian will rest, but only as long as the sacred places remain undefiled. Remember this, daughter of the people. Remember and teach others to remember. The ravens took flight, disappearing into the storm clouds. The wind died to a whisper. The terrible presence that had filled the gorge faded away, leaving only silence and the sound of rain on stone. I helped Maria bandage her cut hand with my first aid kit. She was pale from blood loss and shock, but her eyes were clear. Is it over? I asked. She looked up at the burial niche where the skull sat motionless in its ancient resting place. For now, she said, as long as people respect this place, it'll stay quiet. But Bobby, this can never happen again. People need to know this gorge is sacred, at ground. I nodded, understanding what she meant. The official report would be carefully worded. The climbing routes near the burial caves would be permanently closed. Signs would go up, warning people away. But more importantly, Maria would make sure her people knew. The Cherokee elders would be told what happened here. The old stories would be remembered and retold. The guardian would have living people to help protect what it was bound to defend. As we climbed out of the gorge, I caught one last glimpse of the burial niche. The skull was exactly where it should be, an ancient sentinel keeping watch over sacred ground. I hoped it would stay that way. The official report listed the deaths as acoustic trauma resulting from natural echo phenomena in the gorge environment. It wasn't entirely a lie. The screaming had definitely been acoustic trauma. We just didn't mention what was doing the screaming. The families weren't entirely satisfied with the explanation, but they accepted it. What choice did they have? The truth would have sounded like something out of a horror movie. The climbing routes near the burial caves were permanently closed to the public. We put up signs citing unstable rock formations and cultural sensitivity concerns. The Cherokee Tribal Council officially recognized the area as a sacred site and assigned their own people to monitor it. Maria keeps her word. Every month she hikes down to the burial niche and leaves an offering of sacred tobacco. Sometimes she takes young Cherokee people with her, teaching them about their responsibilities to their ancestors and the sacred places that still need protection. The skull has remained quiet. Hikers sometimes report hearing strange echoes in the gorge, but nothing like what we experienced that night. As long as people stay away from the burial caves and show proper respect, the guardian seems content to rest. My hearing never fully recovered. I wear hearing aids now, a constant reminder of what happened down in those ancient caves. But in a strange way, I'm grateful for the damage. It helps me remember that there are things in these mountains older and more powerful than any government agency or park service. I developed a cultural sensitivity training program for all rangers working in Appalachian forests. We teach them to recognize and respect Native American sacred sites, to understand that some places are off limits for reasons that go beyond normal safety concerns. Some of the younger rangers think it's just political correctness, but the older ones understand. They've all heard stories, seen things they can't explain. They know these mountains hold secrets that are better left undisturbed. I still work in Pisgah National Forest, but I've requested transfers away from Linville Gorge. I tell myself it's because of my hearing damage that the job is too physically demanding now. But the truth is, I can't stand to be near those cliffs anymore. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I can still hear echoes from the gorge. Not screaming exactly, but something like it. A sound that might be wind through stone crevices, or might be an ancient warrior keeping watch over ground that's been sacred since before Europeans ever set foot in these mountains. I don't investigate those sounds anymore. Some things are better left alone. Maria sometimes asks if I regret what happened, if I wish we'd handled things differently. I tell her no, and that's the truth. 4 men died, and that's a tragedy. But how many more would have died if we hadn't made that bargain with the Guardian? The skull is still down there, sitting in its burial niche, watching over sacred ground with empty eye sockets that sometimes glow red in the darkness. The Cherokee stories say it will remain there as long as it's needed, as long as there are people who would disturb what should be left in peace. I hope it never has to wake up again, but if it does, at least now there are people who remember the old ways, who know how to show proper respect to things that are older and more powerful than our modern world likes to admit. The mountains keep their secrets, and some secrets are meant to be kept. My name is Bobby Cliffwalker, and I walk dangerous paths for a living. But the most dangerous path I ever walked led me to understand that there are some places where the dead still stand guard, and some bargains that must be honored no matter what. The screaming has stopped, but the Guardian remains, and that's exactly how it should be. My name is Samuel Coleridge, but everyone calls me Sam. I've been a park ranger in West Virginia for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was November 1981, and the first snow had already started falling up in Dolly Sods. That's a strange place, even on a good day. It sits 4,000 feet up in the air, where the trees grow short and twisted like old men. The ground is mostly wet bogland, full of cranberries and strange plants you don't see anywhere else. When the fog rolls in, which it does a lot, you can't see 10 feet in front of your face. I became a ranger after my brother Tommy died in a mine cave-in back in '68. I couldn't stand being underground anymore after that. The mountains above ground felt safer, cleaner. I was good at my job too. Just last month I'd pulled 3 college kids out of a snowdrift when they got lost hiking. They were turning blue when I found them, but I got them warm and walking again. So when old Ezekiel Hoffman called the ranger station that Tuesday morning, voice all shaky and scared, I figured it was just another normal problem. Maybe a bear getting into his chicken coop, or teenagers messing around on his property. "Sam, you need to get up here right now," Ezekiel said. His farm sat right on the edge of the wilderness area. "Something killed 3 of my cows last night, and it ain't like nothing I ever seen." I drove my truck up the winding dirt road to his place. The trees were already bare, their black branches reaching up like skeleton fingers. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that bites at your nose and makes your breath come out in white puffs. Ezekiel was waiting for me by his barn. He was a tough old guy, been farming these hills for 40 years. But when I got out of my truck, I could see his hands shaking. "Over here," he said, leading me toward him, "this pasture. But I'm telling you now, Sam, this ain't natural." The 3 cows were lying in the middle of the field, maybe 20 feet apart from each other. At first glance, they just looked like they were sleeping. But as I got closer, I could see something was very wrong. The cows were completely white, not their natural color. They'd been brown and black spotted, but their skin had turned the color of old paper, like all the blood had been drained right out of them. I knelt down next to the first one. There were 2 small holes in its neck, perfectly round, about an inch apart. No claw marks, no torn flesh, just those 2 clean punctures. When I pressed on the cow's side, it felt hollow, like an empty water balloon. "You ever see anything like this?" Ezekiel asked. I stood up, brushing snow off my knees. "Must be some kind of wild dog pack," I said, trying to sound confident. "They bite the neck, drain the blood. Happens sometimes with sick animals." But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Dogs tear and rip when they kill. They don't make clean little holes. And they eat meat, not just blood. "What about them tracks?" Ezekiel pointed toward the tree line. I walked over to look. In the soft snow, I could see paw prints leading from the woods to where the cows had been. They were huge, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. Each print was about 6 inches long and 4 inches wide, with deep claw marks in the snow. But here's what really bothered me. Mixed in with the paw prints were other marks that looked almost like human handprints. They were in the snow, right next to the paw marks, like something had been walking on both hands and feet. "I'll set up some traps," I told Ezekiel. "Keep your other animals locked up tight for a few nights. This thing will probably move on soon enough." I spent the rest of that day setting up live traps around Ezekiel's peds, property, and a few more farms nearby. Word was already getting around about the dead cows, and people were scared. In small mountain towns, news travels fast, and it gets bigger with each show telling. That night, I decided to camp out in my truck near Ezekiel's farm just to keep an eye on things. I had my rifle, a thermos of coffee, and a good sleeping bag. I'd done this kind of thing dozens of times before. Around midnight, something woke me up. At first, I couldn't figure out what it was. Then I realized it was too quiet. Way too quiet. No crickets, no owls, no wind in the trees. Nothing. It was like someone had turned off all the sounds in the world. I sat up in my truck and looked out the windows. The moon was almost full, making the snow glow silver white. I could see for maybe 100 yards in every direction. Nothing was moving. Then I noticed something else. My breath wasn't making clouds anymore, even though it had been cold enough before. I looked at the thermometer on my dashboard. It read 15 degrees. An hour ago, it had been 32. I started the truck to get some heat going, but the engine just clicked. The battery was dead. That was impossible. It was brand new just last week. I grabbed my flashlight, but when I tried to turn it on, nothing happened. I shook it, tried again, dead. My backup flashlight was dead too, and my radio just made a static hissing sound. Something was very wrong. I rolled down my window just a crack to listen. Still nothing. But then, from somewhere far off in the woods, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. It was like a dog howling, but deeper and longer than any dog I'd ever heard. And there was something almost human about it, like someone screaming in pain. The howl echoed off the mountains for maybe 10 seconds, then cut off suddenly. The silence came back, thick and heavy like a blanket. I sat in that truck until dawn, rifle across my lap, jumping at every shadow. When the sun finally came up, all the normal sounds came back too. Birds singing, wind in the trees, the distant sound of cars on the highway. My truck started just fine. The next morning I drove back to the ranger station to file my report. My partner Billy Mountaineer was already there, reading yesterday's incident reports over a cup of coffee. Billy was local. His grandpa had been Seneca Indian, and his family had lived in these mountains for generations. "Heard you had some excitement up at Hoffman's place," Billy said, without looking up from his papers. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from him. 3 dead cows. Something drained all their blood. Billy's head snapped up. "Drained their blood?" "Yeah. 2 little holes in each neck. Cows white as sheets. Never seen anything like it." Billy set down his coffee cup real slow. He got a look on his face I'd never seen before. Worried, but more than that. Scared. "Sam," he said quietly, "my grandpa used to tell stories about things like that. Old stories from before the white people came to these mountains." "Come on, Billy, it's probably just a sick dog or something." But Billy shook his head. Grandpa called them Yahyahas, devil dogs. Said they came out when the balance got disturbed, when people hurt the old places too much. I was about to tell him that was just superstition when my radio crackled to life. Ranger Station, this is Jake Morrison. Jake was a local hunter, knew these woods better than anybody. His voice sounded tight, scared. I'm up on Beaver Dam Ridge, and I need help right now. I grabbed the radio. What's your situation, Jake? I found something. Someone. God help me, Sam. You need to get up here now. Billy and I threw our gear in the truck and drove up the mountain as fast as we could. Beaver Dam Ridge was maybe 5 miles from Ezekiel's farm, but it felt like a different world. The trees were thicker there, mostly old pines that blocked out most of the sunlight even in the middle of the day. We found Jake. He had his truck parked on an old logging road. He was sitting on his tailgate smoking a cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Jake, I called out as we approached. Where is it? He pointed into the woods without saying a word. We followed a deer path maybe 200 yards into the trees. That's where we found what was left of Hunter Morgan, another local guy who'd been camping up here for the weekend. I've seen people die in the mountains, hypothermia, falls, heart attacks. But I'd never seen anything like this. Hunter was hanging upside down from a pine tree, about 8 feet off the ground. His ankles were tied with what looked like climbing rope, but the knots were strange, more like something an animal would make than a person. His arms hung down toward the ground, and his face was the same white color as Ezekiel's cow's. 2 small holes in his neck, just like the cow's. No blood anywhere on the ground below him, like it had all been sucked out. We need to call the state police, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Billy was studying the ground around the tree. Sam, look at this. The same tracks as before, huge paw prints mixed with handprints all around the base of the tree. But these tracks were different. They went straight up the trunk of the tree, like whatever made them had just walked up the side of it like it was flat ground. That's impossible, I whispered. Billy stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. Not if you know the old stories. We called the state police from our radio, and they showed up about an hour later with the coroner. But they didn't know what to make of it either. The official report said Hunter had died from severe blood loss due to animal attack, but I could see in their eyes they didn't believe it any more than I did. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those tracks going straight up the tree trunk, and about the way all my equipment had stopped working near Ezekiel's farm. Around midnight, I decided to drive back up to Dolly Sods and have another look around. The road was empty, just me and my headlights cutting through the darkness. When I got to the area where Hunter's body had been found, I parked and got out with my flashlight. Everything seemed normal. My equipment was working fine now. I followed the old logging road for maybe half a mile, just looking around trying to make sense of what had happened. The moon was still almost full, so I could see pretty well even without my flashlight. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a shadow moving between the trees, but shadows don't move like that, smooth and fast, like water flowing uphill. I stopped walking and squinted into the darkness. The shadow stopped too. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it toward where I'd seen the movement. The beam lit up the trees, but there was nothing there, just pine branches swaying in the wind. I started walking again, slower now, listening for any sound that didn't belong. After maybe 50 yards, I heard something that made me freeze. Breathing. Slow, deep breathing, like a big dog panting. But it was coming from above me. I pointed my flashlight up into the trees. About 20 feet above my head, crouched on a thick pine branch that should have been way too thin to hold anything heavy, was the biggest animal I'd ever seen. It looked like a cross between a wolf and a man. Its body was covered in thick black fur, but it was standing on 2 legs like a person. Its head was shaped like a dog's, but bigger, with a long snout full of teeth that gleamed white in my flashlight beam. And its eyes were bright red, like 2 hot coals. We stared at each other for maybe 3 seconds. That felt like 3 hours. Then the thing opened its mouth and let out that same howl I'd heard the night before, long and deep and almost human. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I dropped my flashlight and ran back toward my truck as fast as I could, crashing through branches and stumbling over roots in the dark. Behind me, I could hear something following. not running on the ground, but moving through the trees, branch to branch, keeping up with me easily. I made it to my truck and gunned the engine, spinning gravel as I tore down the mountain road. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of two red eyes watching from the tree line. I didn't slow down until I was back in town. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen that night. Who would believe me? A giant wolf man living in the trees? Even Billy, with all his grandfather's stories, would think I'd cracked under pressure. But 3 days later, Billy didn't show up for work. That wasn't like him. Billy was always on time, always reliable. When he didn't answer his radio, I drove out to his little cabin on the edge of the wilderness area. His truck was there, but Billy wasn't. The front door was hanging open, moving back and forth in the wind. Inside, the place was torn apart, furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere, deep claw marks in the wooden walls. On Billy's kitchen table, I found a bunch of old books and papers spread out. They were all about local Indian legends and stories. One book was open to a page with a drawing that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of the thing I'd seen in the tree. The caption underneath said, Yahya, the blood drinker. I read the page quickly. According to the legend, the Yahya was a spirit that appeared when the natural balance was disturbed. It could take the shape of a giant wolf or stand like a man. It fed only on blood, never flesh, and could climb any surface like it was flat ground. The stories said it was immortal, but could be hurt by silver and couldn't cross running water. At the bottom of the page, Billy had written a note in pencil. Clear cutting started last month in Sector 7. Ancient den sites destroyed. I looked at the date on Billy's calendar. He'd been missing for 2 days. I spent the rest of that day searching the woods around Billy's cabin, calling his name, looking for any sign of where he might have gone. I found some of those huge paw prints near a creek behind his house, but they stopped at the water's edge and didn't continue on the other side. As the sun started to set, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of going home, I drove to the old fire tower on Bear Rock Ridge. It was a metal tower about 60 feet tall, built back in the 1940s to watch for forest fires. Nobody used it anymore, but it was sturdy and high off the ground. I climbed to the top and set up camp for the night. I had my rifle, some food, and a sleeping bag. From up there, I could see for miles in every direction. If something was moving around in the woods below, I'd spot it. Around 10 o'clock, I saw lights moving through the trees about a mile away. At first, I thought it might be other searchers looking for Billy. But the lights weren't moving like people with flashlights. They were too fast, and they kept going up and down like they were moving through the trees instead of on the ground. As I watched, the lights got closer. There were 3 of them now, weaving back and forth through the forest, heading straight toward my tower. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a better look. What I saw made me sick to my stomach. The lights were eyes. Glowing red eyes, just like the thing I'd seen before. And they weren't alone. I could make out the shapes of regular coyotes running with them, but the coyotes' eyes were glowing red too, like they'd been infected with something. The pack reached the base of my tower and started circling it, looking up at me. In the moonlight, I could see the leader clearly now. It was the same creature from before, but this time it was walking on 4 legs like a regular wolf. Except it was huge, maybe the size of a small horse. One of the coyotes tried to climb the metal tower. It got maybe 10 feet up, before it lost its grip and fell back to the ground. The metal seemed to hurt it somehow. It yelped and shook its paw like it had been burned. The big creature tried next. It placed its paws on the metal legs of the tower, then jerked back like it had touched a hot stove. It looked up at me and opened its mouth in what might have been a snarl or a grin. Then it started howling, and all the coyotes joined in. The sound echoed off the mountains, a horrible chorus that went on for maybe 5 minutes. When it finally stopped, I could hear something else, a human voice, screaming for help. "Sam! Sam, help me!" It was Billy's voice, coming from somewhere in the woods below. But I could see the whole area around the tower, and Billy wasn't there. The voice was coming from the big creature. "Please, Sam," the voice called out again. "It's got me trapped. I can't get away." I knew it wasn't really Billy. Somehow that thing could make itself sound like him. But hearing Billy's voice calling for help, even knowing it was fake, was almost more than I could stand. The pack stayed around my tower until dawn, sometimes howling, sometimes silent. Every hour or so, the creature would call out in Billy's voice, begging me to come down and help. I stayed put, rifle ready, counting the minutes until sunrise. When the first light appeared on the horizon, the pack melted away into the forest like they'd never been there at all. I climbed down from the tower on shaking legs and drove straight to the ranger station. I called the state police and told them Billy was missing, that I'd found signs of a struggle at his cabin. I didn't mention the pack of glowing-eyed animals that had surrounded my tower all night. The search and rescue team found Billy 2 days later. He was hanging from a tree just like Hunter Morgan had been. 8 feet off the ground, drained completely white, 2 small holes in his neck. But this time was worse, because I'd heard him calling for help, and I hadn't been able to do anything about it. The official report said he'd been killed by wild animal. Yes, same as Hunter. But I knew the truth, and I knew the thing in the woods wasn't done hunting yet. It was just getting started. After Billy's funeral, I requested emergency backup from the State Forestry Service. I told them we had a pack of rabid animals that had killed 2 people, and I needed help tracking them down before they killed again. They sent me Dave Wilson, a young ranger from Pennsylvania who thought he knew everything about wildlife management. Dave showed up with a truck full of tranquilizer guns and live traps, ready to catch himself some wild dogs. "Don't worry," Dave said as we drove up to Dolly Sods that evening. "I've dealt with problem animals before. We'll have this wrapped up in no time." I tried to explain that this wasn't like anything he'd seen before, but Dave just smiled and nodded like I was some old-timer telling tall tales. He'd learn soon enough. We set up camp near the area where Billy had been found. Dave wanted to use spotlights and make noise to draw the animals out. I convinced him to wait until dark and be quiet about it. The last thing I wanted was to attract that thing's attention before we were ready. As the sun went down, Dave was checking his equipment and talking about proper animal control procedures. I was loading my rifle with bullets I'd had specially made that afternoon. Regular hunting rounds with silver tips, melted down from my wedding ring, and Billy's badge. "You know, Sam," Dave said, "I think you might be overreacting a bit. These are probably just normal coyotes with some kind of disease. Makes them more aggressive than usual, but nothing we can't handle." Before I could answer, all the normal forest sounds stopped. Just like before. No crickets, no owls, nothing. The temperature started dropping fast. Dave noticed it too. "That's weird," he said, looking around. "Why did everything get so quiet?" I pointed to the trees at the edge of our camp. "Because they're here." Red eyes appeared in the darkness, maybe 20 pairs of them, surrounding us in a wide circle. Dave fumbled for his flashlight and pointed it toward the eyes. The beam lit up a pack of coyotes, but they weren't normal coyotes anymore. They were bigger than they should be, and their eyes glowed like hot coals. "What the hell?" Dave whispered. Then the big one stepped out of the trees. Standing on 2 legs like a man, it was at least 7 feet tall. Its black fur seemed to absorb the light, making it look like a hole cut out of the night. When it opened its mouth, I could see rows of sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh and puncturing veins. Dave raised his tranquilizer gun, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. "What is that thing?" The creature looked right at him and spoke in a voice that sounded exactly like Dave's own. "Help me, Sam. It's got me. Please help me." Dave made a sound like he was choking. "How is it doing that? How does it know my voice?" I raised my rifle and pointed it at the creature. "It's been watching us, listening to us." The creature tilted its head like a curious dog, then dropped down to 4 legs. It moved toward us slowly, testing, seeing what we would do. The pack of coyotes started closing in from all sides. "Silver bullets," I told Dave. "Aim for the chest." "Silver bullets?" Dave's voice cracked. "Sam, this is insane." The creature suddenly rushed forward, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I fired 3 shots, hitting it twice in the chest. It screamed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a dying animal, and stumbled backward. Where the silver bullets had hit, its fur was smoking and burning. Black blood dripped onto the ground and started hissing like acid. But it wasn't down. It looked at me with those red eyes, and I could see something like intelligence there. Something that understood I was the real threat. It howled long and loud, and the pack of coyotes charged. Dave got 2 of them with tranquilizer darts before they reached him, but there were too many. They knocked him down and started dragging him toward the trees. I could hear him screaming, but I couldn't help him. The big creature was coming for me. I fired my last 3 silver bullets as it leaped through the air toward me. 1 missed, but 2 hit it in the head and neck. This time it went down hard, thrashing and howling in pain. The coyotes stopped dragging Dave and ran back into the forest. Whatever power that thing had over them was broken. Dave was hurt bad. Deep bite marks on his arms and legs. But he was alive. I helped him to the truck and radioed for medical help. Then I walked back to where the creature had fallen. It was still alive, but just barely. The silver had done something to it, made it shrink down to almost normal size. It looked like a regular black wolf now, except for those red eyes. "Why?" I asked it. "Why did you come here?" It looked at me for a long moment, then spoke one last time in Billy's voice. "You destroyed our home. Cut down the old trees, dug up the old places. We had nowhere else to go." Then the red light went out of its eyes, and it was just a dead wolf lying in the dirt. The official report said that Dave and I had been attacked by a pack of rabid coyotes led by an unusually large wolf. The bodies of Hunter Morgan and Billy Mountaineer were attributed to the same pack. Case closed. The clear-cutting operation in Sector 7 was quietly shut down. The company claimed they'd found environmental concerns that made logging impossible. The area was redesignated as protected wilderness, which means no one can develop it or cut down trees there ever again. Dave recovered from his injuries and requested a transfer to Florida. He never talked about what really happened that night, and I never asked him to. Some things are better left buried. I stayed on as a ranger for 3 more years, but I was never the same. Every time I saw blood, even just a cut finger or a scraped knee, I'd get sick to my stomach and have to sit down. The doctor said it was trauma from seeing Billy and Hunter like that. He was probably right. In 1984, I transferred to a ranger station in Arizona. Desert country, where the trees are small and there aren't many shadows. I've been here ever since. But sometimes, when I'm driving through the mountains at night, I'll see a pair of red eyes watching from the tree line. I know it's probably just a deer or a coyote, something normal and harmless. But I always check to make sure my windows are rolled up tight and I don't slow down until I'm back in town. The official records say the beast of Dolly Sods was just a rabid wolf pack. The scientists have their explanations and the government has its reports. But I know what I saw in those mountains. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if killing that creature really ended things, or if there are others out there waiting in the deep woods where people don't go anymore. The Seneca Indians had stories about the Yahyahas going back hundreds of years. They said these creatures appeared whenever the balance between civilization and wilderness was disturbed too much. Looking around at how much we've changed the world since 1981, I sometimes think those old stories might be more important than ever. I just hope we don't have to learn that lesson the hard way. My name is Catherine Thornfield, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 11 years now. Back in 1963, I was the first woman they hired for this job. Most folks thought I was crazy taking it on, especially after losing my husband David in Vietnam. But teaching school wasn't enough anymore. I needed something that mattered. The mountains became my home, my purpose. I learned every trail, every hidden valley, every dangerous spot where families might get lost. I specialized in teaching camping safety to families with children. Kids were always my soft spot, maybe because David and I never got the chance to have our own. August 1974 was brutal. The heat hung over the Smokies like a wet blanket, and thunderstorms rolled through every afternoon. That's when people make mistakes, get careless, take shortcuts they shouldn't take. I was checking my radio in the ranger station when the call came in. The Johnson family, parents and 3 kids, hadn't returned from their camping trip in Dark Hollow. They'd been due back 2 days ago. Dark Hollow. Just hearing the name made my stomach tight. It was a valley system way back in the mountains, accessible only by unmarked trails. No roads could reach it. The Cherokee folks who still lived around here had old stories about that place. They called it part of the Nightland, where spirits lived. I'd always figured those were just stories to keep people away from dangerous terrain. But I'd been to Dark Hollow before. 3 years back, I'd found a group of Boy Scouts who'd gotten lost there during a storm, all 6 of them, sitting around their cold campfire like they were waiting for someone. They couldn't remember how they'd gotten separated from their leader, couldn't explain why they'd wandered so far off the marked trail. When I found them, they kept looking over their shoulders and why, spearing about the other children they'd heard laughing in the woods. Kids have big imaginations. That's what I told myself then. The Johnson family was different, though. Frank Johnson was an experienced camper, a careful man who'd called in his exact route and timeline. His wife Sarah was a nurse, practical, level-headed. Their kids were 8, 10, and 12, old enough to follow rules, young enough to stay close to camp. I packed my gear as the afternoon storm clouds gathered. My radio, first aid kit, emergency flares, and my camping knife, a good iron blade my grandfather had given me. Cherokee blood ran in my family too, on my mother's side, though I'd never paid much attention to the old ways. The hike into Dark Hollow took 3 hours. The trail twisted through dense forest where the canopy blocked most of the sunlight, even in mid-afternoon. As I got deeper into the valley, something felt wrong. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Then I realized I wasn't hearing any adult animal sounds. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no rustle of deer in the underbrush. Just the occasional cry of something young and lost. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a bad storm. When I reached the Johnson campsite, my heart sank. The orange tent was still up, guy lines tight and proper. The camp stove sat on its metal table with a pot of what looked like soup, still warm. Sleeping bags were laid out neat and tidy inside the tent. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing. It was like the family had simply vanished into thin air. I called out their names, hoping maybe they were just exploring nearby. "Frank! Sarah! Kids!" My voice echoed strangely in the valley, bouncing off rock walls I couldn't see through the trees. The echo came back wrong somehow, like it was carrying extra sounds with it. I set up my base radio and tried to reach headquarters. Static filled the channel. But underneath the white noise, I swore I heard something else. Laughter. Children's laughter, high and bright and playful. "Base, this is Ranger Thornfield at Dark Hollow. The Johnson family campsite is intact, but they're not here. No signs of struggle. Over." More static. Then a voice crackling through. "Kate, weather's interfering with signals. You're breaking up. Repeat your status." I tried again, but the laughter was getting louder. I turned the volume down and switched off the radio. Maybe it was just interference from the storms. I spent the rest of the daylight searching the immediate area, looking for footprints or broken branches that might show which direction they'd gone. The ground near their tent was soft from recent rain, perfect for holding tracks. That's when I found them. Tiny handprints in the mud, much smaller than those of the Johnson children. They led away from the campsite toward a thick grove of mountain laurel. But these weren't normal prints. They were perfectly formed, like they'd been pressed into the mud by hands that barely weighed anything. And there were too many of them. Dozens of small handprints, all leading in the same direction. I followed the trail through the laurel thicket. The branches seemed to part easily for me, almost like they wanted me to follow. On the other side, the land dropped away into a rocky depression I'd never seen before, though I'd mapped this area several times. At the bottom of the depression was a cave entrance, partially hidden by hanging moss and twisted roots. The handprints led right to it and disappeared into the darkness. I'd explored caves before, part of the job. But this one felt different. Cold air drifted out of it, carrying a smell like wet limestone and something else. Something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. I clicked on my flashlight and called into the cave. "Hello? Johnson family? Are you in there? The echo came back, but it brought sounds with it. Whispers, footsteps on stone, and that laughter again, definitely coming from somewhere deep in the cave. I should have waited for backup. Should have called for the search and rescue team. But something about those handprints made me think of children in trouble, maybe hurt and scared in the dark. I couldn't wait. The cave entrance was narrow, but it opened up quickly into a larger tunnel. My flashlight beam reached maybe 20 feet before the darkness swallowed it. The walls were smooth limestone carved by underground water over thousands of years. But there were marks on them that water hadn't made. Scratches in the stone, too regular to be natural. I followed the tunnel deeper, calling out every few minutes. The floor was covered in fine sand that showed footprints clearly. Adult prints. Had to be Frank and Sarah. But mixed in with them were those tiny handprints again, and small, bare footprints, like children running. The tunnel branched into 3 passages. I chose the middle one, following the freshest tracks. Here the walls were different. Someone, or something, had arranged small stones in careful patterns, circles within circles, spirals, shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. That's when I found Frank Johnson. He was sitting on a flat rock about 50 yards into the passage, his back to me. Still in his camping clothes, his hiking boots laced tight. For a second I felt pure relief. "Frank, thank God, where are Sarah and the kids?" He didn't answer, didn't move. I walked around in front of him and my flashlight beam hit his face. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. Frank Johnson looked like he'd aged 40 years overnight. His hair was white, his face deeply lined and sunken. His eyes stared straight ahead, glassy and empty. When I checked his pulse, his skin felt like paper and his heart wasn't beating. But his body was still warm. I backed away from Frank's body, my hands shaking as I tried to radio for help. But my radio was only picking up static now, and underneath it, the children's laughter was getting louder and more distinct. It sounded like it was coming from all 3 tunnel branches at once. I had to find Sarah and the kids. Whatever had happened to Frank, they might still be alive. I chose the left passage this time, moving fast but trying to stay quiet. The tunnel sloped downward, and I could hear the sound of running water somewhere ahead. The stone formations were getting more elaborate here. Not just circles, but towering arrangements of rocks balanced impossibly on top of each other. Some of them were taller than me, defying gravity in ways that made my head spin. The laughter was closer now. Sometimes it echoed from behind me, sometimes from side passages I couldn't see. It sounded like a playground full of happy children, but there was something wrong with it. Too sharp, too musical, like birds mimicking human sounds. I found the first piece of clothing about a quarter-mile down the tunnel. A small blue t-shirt, size 8, hanging from a sharp projection of rock. It was dry and clean, like it had just been hung out to air. The shirt belonged to Tommy Johnson, the youngest boy. 20 yards further, a pair of pink shorts, size 10. That would be Emma, the middle child. Then a yellow sundress in size 12 for Lucy, the oldest girl. Each piece of clothing was carefully placed, like someone was marking a trail. But they were arranged wrong. The clothes formed shapes on the cave floor, the same spiral patterns I'd seen in the stone arrangements. And in the center of each spiral was a small pile of what looked like white pebbles. I knelt down and picked up one of the pebbles. It wasn't stone. It was a tooth, a child's baby tooth, perfectly clean and white. The laughter stopped suddenly, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was so complete it hurt my ears. Even the sound of running water had stopped. Then I heard my name. Kate. A man's voice, familiar and warm. "Kate, I'm here." My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice. David's voice, my husband, calling to me from somewhere deeper in the cave. "Kate, I've been waiting for you. Come find me." It wasn't possible. David had died in a jungle on the other side of the world 3 years ago. I'd buried him in Arlington Cemetery. But his voice was so clear, so real. "Don't listen." The new voice was different, older. A woman speaking Cherokee, though I only understood a few words. "Uwayena, Uwayena." The little people, the Cherokee word for the Nunahi. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. An elderly Cherokee woman stood at the edge of my light, wearing traditional dress, but she was translucent, like mist given form. "You know the stories," she said, switching to English. "Your grandmother told you. The Nunahai steal children, make them into fairy children. This is their place." "Kate," David's voice again, more urgent. "I found them. I found the children. Come quickly." The Cherokee woman shook her head. "That is not your husband. That is them, wearing his voice like clothes. They know what will make you follow." But even as she warned me, I could see her fading. The cave was pulling her away, or pulling me deeper into its influence. I had to make a choice. Follow David's voice and probably walk into a trap, or trust a ghost story and let 3 children die in the dark. I followed the voice. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling. The sound of running water was back, echoing off invisible stone surfaces. And there were lights ahead. Not electric lights, but a soft, shifting glow, like moonlight on water. "Kate! Over here!" David's voice coming from my right. I turned toward it and saw them. Sarah Johnson and her 3 children, standing in a circle around a pool of that strange, glowing water. Sarah looked up at me and smiled, but her smile was too wide, and her eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. "We were waiting for you," she said in Sarah's voice, but the words came out in perfect rhythm, like a song. "The children want to play." The 3 Johnson kids turned toward me in unison. Their skin was pale as paper, their eyes solid black, and when they smiled, their teeth were sharp as needles. They still looked like human children, but wrong in every detail. "Come play with us, Ranger Kate," they sang together. "Come down to the water. It's warm and safe, and you'll never be lonely again." Behind them, more shapes moved in the darkness. Dozens of children, all pale and black-eyed, all singing the same song. Some wore clothes from different decades. A boy in knickers and suspenders, a girl in a 1940s dress, twins in matching outfits from the 1950s. All the missing children from Dark Hollow's history, transformed into something else. And in the center of them all, wearing his army dress uniform, stood David. But his eyes were black too, and when he smiled, his teeth were sharp. "I've been so lonely, Kate," he said. "Stay with us. Let them change you. Then we can be together forever." The fairy children began to move toward me, their bare feet making no sound on the stone floor. Their song grew louder, more compelling. It made my head feel fuzzy, made my legs want to carry me forward to the glowing pool. I gripped my camping knife tighter and took a step back. The Cherokee woman's warning echoed in my memory. Iron objects. The old stories said the Nunahai couldn't stand iron. "Stay back." I held the knife out in front of me. The children stopped singing. The pale boy who had been Tommy Johnson tilted his head and laughed. "Iron can't help you here, Ranger Kate. This is our place, our rules." But I noticed they didn't come any closer. Sarah Johnson, or the thing wearing her appearance, stepped forward instead. "Don't be afraid. We only want to help you join your family. Look, David is here. All the children you've worried about over the years are here, safe and happy and together forever." She was right about one thing. I could see them all now in the shifting light. The Boy Scouts I'd found 3 years ago, they were here too, pale and black-eyed like the others. And children from even further back. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. "You're not safe," I said, my voice shaking. "You're not happy. You're trapped." The thing wearing David's face laughed. "Trapped? We're free. Free from pain, free from fear, free from death. Join us, Kate. Let the water change you." The pool was glowing brighter now, and I could see it wasn't water at all. It was something thick and silver, moving like mercury. And floating in it were bones. Human bones, old and young, mixed together. "The adults," I whispered. "That's what happens to the adults." "Only their bodies," Sarah Thing said. "We keep their voices, their memories. everything you loved about them. But not their souls. The fairy children hissed at that word and stepped back. Even fake David's smile faltered. I remembered more of my grandmother's stories now. The Nunahai were old, older than human settlement in these mountains. They were the Cherokee little people, but twisted somehow, changed by centuries of anger and loneliness. They stole human children because they wanted families, wanted to belong to something. But they didn't understand that families were built on love, not possession. "You can't keep them," I said, louder now. "They don't belong to you." "They belong to us now," the Tommy thing shrieked, its child voice turning harsh and alien. "We made them perfect. We made them eternal." That's when I saw the truth. The pale children weren't just transformed humans. They were the original Nunahai, wearing the shapes of their victims like masks. The real children, the real Tommy and Emma and Lucy, were gone, consumed by these creatures hungry for human form. But maybe not all gone. Maybe some part of them was still in there, trapped and screaming. I raised my iron knife and spoke the one Cherokee phrase my grandmother had taught me when I was small. Navi adalvhai, go away spirits. The effect was immediate. The fairy children shrieked and scattered, their perfect human forms flickering like bad television reception. For just a moment, I saw what they really were underneath. Twisted, ancient things with too many teeth and fingers like twigs. The pool began to boil and steam. Bones rose to the surface. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the adults who had come looking for their children over the years. But the creatures weren't finished. They regrouped quickly, and now they looked more like their true selves, sharp and hungry and very, very old. "Iron and words," the Tommy thing hissed. "Clever little ranger, but you're still just one human woman, alone in our place." They rushed me all at once. I slashed with the knife, and wherever the iron touched them, they screamed and fell back. But there were too many. They grabbed at me from all sides, their twig fingers surprisingly strong. I felt myself being pulled toward the bone pool. That's when the real children started fighting back. It was just whispers at first, coming from inside the fairy creatures. "Help us, save us, don't let us disappear." The voice that sounded like Tommy Johnson spoke over his creatures hissing, "The circle. Break the circle of stones." I looked around frantically and saw it. A ring of standing stones around the pool, carved with the same spiral symbols I'd seen throughout the caves. The ceremonial circle that bound the Nunahai to this place. I twisted free of grasping hands and dove for the nearest stone. It was tall as me and covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. I raised my iron knife and brought it down hard on the carved spirals. The stone cracked with a sound like thunder. The fairy children screamed in unison, a sound that nearly burst my eardrums. I hit the stone again and again. Each blow sent cracks spiderwebbing across the ancient symbols, the creatures. Creatures were clawing at me now, desperate to stop me, but their strength was failing as their binding circle weakened. The stone shattered. Light exploded through the chamber, not the sick glow of the pool, but clean white light like sunrise. The fairy children shrieked and began to dissolve, their stolen human shapes melting away. The pool stopped boiling and began to drain, revealing hundreds of human bones on its bottom. And standing in that clean light were 3 small figures, the real Johnson children, pale and scared, but human. Still human. "Run!" I shouted to them. "Follow the light!" We ran together through collapsing tunnels as the fairy realm came apart around us. Behind us, the Nunahai screamed their rage and loss. But they couldn't follow. Their power was broken, their binding circle destroyed. We stumbled out of the cave entrance just as the sun was rising, 3 days after I'd gone in. The rescue team found us sitting by the Johnson family campsite, the 3 children huddled close to me like I was their mother. They were dehydrated and confused, but alive. Really alive. When they asked what had happened, I told them the truth, that I'd found the children in a cave system that had partially collapsed. Their parents had been killed in the collapse, I said. The bodies were buried under tons of stone and couldn't be recovered. It was close enough to the truth. Frank and Sarah Johnson were dead. their life force drained by creatures older than human memory. The children were alive, but changed. They didn't remember everything that had happened to them in the fairy realm, and that was probably a mercy. The cave system was officially sealed due to geological instability and drowning hazards. Warning signs were posted, and the area was marked off-limits to hikers. But I knew the signs and barriers wouldn't stop everyone. They never do. I submitted a report recommending new safety protocols for family camping groups, mandatory buddy systems, check-in schedules every 4 hours, and restrictions on camping in isolated areas like Dark Hollow. My supervisors approved them without question. What I didn't put in the report was what I found when I went back to Dark Hollow 3 months later. New cave entrances had opened up about 5 miles east of the original site. The rock formations around them were arranged in perfect spirals, and when the wind was right, you could hear laughter echoing from inside. The Nunahai weren't gone, just moved, waiting for the barriers around the old site to be forgotten, for new families to wander into their territory. I requested a permanent assignment to the Dark Hollow district. Officially, it was to study geological instabilities and prevent future camping accidents. Unofficially, it was to stand guard, to watch for the signs, families who don't check in on time, children's laughter where no children should be, handprints in the mud leading to places that don't appear on any map. I've been doing this job for 30 years now, saved 14 children from various cave systems throughout the Smokies, lost 6 adults who went looking for their kids and found something else instead. The Cherokee folks who know the old stories call me the Guardian now. They leave offerings at my ranger station, iron nails, running water in mason jars, protective herbs. They understand what I'm really doing out here. The children I've saved grow up and have children of their own. Sometimes they bring their families camping in the Smokies. When they do, they always stop by my station first. They want me to tell their kids about camping safety, about staying on marked trails and never wandering off alone. But what I really tell them is simpler. Some places in these mountains are older than human memory. Some things that live in the darkness are always hungry. And sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that look like children playing games. My name is Catherine Thornfield, and I'm still on duty. Still watching the places where the human world touches something else. Still listening for laughter that doesn't belong. Because the Nunahai are still out there, in caves that shift and change when you're not looking. Still stealing children. Still wearing their faces like masks. Still waiting for families who wander too far from the safe, well-marked trails. And I'll be here when they do. Iron knife in my hand, Cherokee prayers on my lips, standing between the light and the dark. Some rangers protect people from bears and falling rocks. I protect them from things that are much, much older. That's my job. That's my calling. That's my burden. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. My name is Jackson Mountainheart, but folks just call me Jack. I've been a park ranger in these Virginia mountains for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these ridges could throw at me. Black bears, lost hikers, flash floods, hunting accidents, you name it. But what happened up on Devil's Backbone in October of '62 changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I was 43 then, living alone in my cabin after losing my Mary to childbirth 3 years back. The mountains had become my only family, and I knew every rock, every trail, every hiding spot where a wounded animal might crawl to die. My granddaddy taught me to track before I could properly tie my boots, and his daddy before him. Mountain blood runs thick in the Mountainheart family. Devil's Backbone sits about 30 miles from the nearest town, a sharp ridge system that cuts through some of the thickest wilderness in Virginia. Most folks avoid it. The Cherokee used to call something up there Kekla Kudla, which roughly means the one who eats men. Old stories, I figured. Just tales to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. The call came in on October 23rd, crackling through my radio like a dying man's last breath. The Brennan family, Bill, his wife Sarah, and their 2 kids, had been camping up near Devil's Backbone. They were 4 days overdue, and Bill's brother was worried sick. "Jack, you gotta find them," the voice pleaded through the static. Bill's got little ones with him, 8 and 10 years old. I packed my gear that morning under a gray sky that looked like dirty dishwater. The temperature had dropped overnight and frost covered everything like a thin layer of death. Hunting season was in full swing, but something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. In 15 years of ranging these mountains, I'd never heard such complete silence. The hike to their last known campsite took me 3 hours through thick rhododendron bushes that grabbed at my jacket like skeletal fingers. My compass started acting funny about halfway up, spinning lazy circles instead of pointing true north. I figured it was the iron deposits in the rocks messing with it. These mountains are full of old mine shafts and metal veins. When I reached where the Brennans should have been camping, I found their site all right, but something had torn through it like a tornado made of pure rage. Their blue dome tent was shredded into ribbons, camping chairs were twisted into metal pretzels, and trees, 15-foot oak trees, were snapped clean in half like someone had stepped on toothpicks. I knelt down and studied the damage. In my years tracking, I'd seen what black bears could do to a campsite. I'd seen what mountain lions could do. I'd even cleaned up after that time. Lightning struck a camp and scattered gear for 100 yards. But this was different. This was impossible. The silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the leaves. Just my own breathing and the sound of my heart beating too fast in my chest. I called out for the Brennans, my voice echoing off the ridge walls like a gunshot. Nobody answered. That's when I found the first footprint. The track was pressed deep into the soft mud beside their ruined campfire. At first glance, it looked almost human, if humans had feet 20 inches long and claws that could tear through rock. The print was so deep it had filled with muddy water, and when I measured it against my own boot, I felt something cold crawl up my spine. I've tracked every animal in these mountains. Bear paws, deer hooves, bobcat prints, even the rare mountain lion track. This wasn't any of them. The shape was wrong, too long, too narrow, with 5 distinct toe marks ending in, and claw scratches that gouged the earth like knife cuts. Following the trail, I found more prints leading away from the campsite toward the deeper woods. Each step was 8 feet apart. Whatever made these tracks was running on 2 legs and running fast. I'd seen Olympic sprinters who couldn't cover that much ground in a single stride. The trail led me through a maze of rhododendron thickets toward an old creek bed. That's where I found what was left of their horse. Bill Brennan had brought a pack horse to carry their camping gear. A gentle old mare named Buttercup that his kids loved to pet. I found her about 200 yards from their camp, and what I saw there still wakes me up at night. The horse was 30 feet up in an oak tree. Not just pieces of the horse. The whole animal somehow wedged into the fork of 2 massive branches like someone had thrown a 1,000-pound rag doll into the air. The trunk showed claw marks spiraling up the bark, deep gouges that went clean through to the white wood underneath. I stood there staring up at that impossible sight, my neck craned back until it hurt. No bear could climb that high carrying prey that heavy. No mountain lion could lift a full-grown horse. Hell, no machine could have done it without leaving tracks. And the only tracks around that tree were more of those 20-inch prints. My radio crackled to life, making me jump like a spooked cat. Jack, you copy? It was Moses Whitehawk, my partner and the best tracker in 3 counties. Moses was Cherokee, about my age, and one of the few men I trusted completely in these mountains. His family had been telling stories about these ridges for generations. I copy, Moses. Where are you? About 2 miles south of your position. Just found something you need to see. I'll head your way. But Moses. Yeah? Bring your rifle. And extra ammunition. The static faded, leaving me alone with the silence and the impossible sight of a dead horse in a tree. I took photos with my camera, though I knew nobody would believe them. Then I started hiking toe. Hard Moses following the ridgeline through woods that felt like they were watching me. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen. The silence wasn't natural. In all my years ranging, I'd never experienced anything like it. No bird songs, no insect buzz, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind had died completely. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. I found Moses standing beside another campsite, or what used to be one. This camp was older, maybe a week, and whoever had been here had left in a hurry. A coffee pot was still sitting on cold ashes. Sleeping bags were laid out like their owners had just stepped away for a minute. "Hunters," Moses said, pointing to the rifle cases and camouflage gear scattered around. "3 of them, looks like. But Jack..." He led me to the edge of the clearing, where 3 trees stood in a perfect triangle. Each tree had been marked with claw scratches, but these weren't random. The marks formed patterns, spirals and crosses that looked almost like writing. "My grandmother used to tell stories about marks like these," Moses said quietly. "Said they were territory markers for something that ain't supposed to exist anymore." "What kind of something?" Moses looked at me with dark eyes that had seen too much, the kind that hunts men for sport. That's when we heard the first scream. The scream came from the north, echoing off the ridge walls like a lost soul crying for help. But there was something wrong with it, something that made every hair on my body stand up straight. It sounded human, but too loud, too long. No human throat could make a sound that carried that far through thick forest. "Sarah Brennan?" Moses whispered. I nodded, but I wasn't sure. The voice sounded like Sarah, but how could she scream that loud? And why did it seem to come from 3 different directions at once? We moved toward the sound, rifles read, I following a game trail that wound deeper into the mountain. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees, and our breath came out in white puffs that hung in the still air like ghosts. "Help me, please, somebody help me!" This time the voice was closer, definitely female, definitely terrified. But Moses grabbed my arm before I could run toward it. "Listen," he whispered. I stopped and listened hard. Then I heard it. Or rather, I heard what I wasn't hearing. The woman's voice was screaming for help, but there were no sounds of running, no branches breaking, no footsteps. Just the voice, floating through the trees like it was coming from a radio speaker. "That ain't right," Moses muttered. The voice screamed again, this time from behind us. We spun around, rifles raised, but saw nothing except dark trees and shadows. Then it came from our left, then our right, then from directly overhead, like someone was hanging in the branches above us. "Jack, Moses, help us!" Now it was calling our names. But Sarah Brennan had never met Moses, and I'd only spoken to her once when they'd stopped at the ranger station for their camping permit. We pressed deeper into the woods, following a creek that had cut a deep ravine between 2 ridges. The water was running black, and it smelled wrong, like metal and rot. Dead fish floated belly up in the shallows, and the rocks along the creek bed were covered with a slimy film that looked almost oily. That's where we found Bill Brennan. He was 40 feet up in a massive pine tree, hung upside down like a deer that had been dressed for butchering. His body was twisted at impossible angles, arms bent backwards, legs folded wrong. Something had crushed his rib cage like an empty beer can. Moses threw up in the creek. I just stood there, staring up at what used to be a man with 2 kids and a wife who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Bill's eyes were gone, but his mouth was open in a silent scream that would follow me to my grave. "Jesus Christ," Moses whispered, wiping his mouth with a shaking hand. Above Bill's body, arved deep into the pine bark, were more of those spiral patterns. Fresh sap was still bleeding from the cuts, running down the trunk like golden tears. That's when I saw the children. 10-year-old Tommy Brennan was wedged into a fork of branches about 20 feet up the same tree. His little sister Lucy was higher up, maybe 30 feet, wrapped around the trunk like she'd been climbing it when something grabbed her. Both kids were positioned so they were looking down at their father's broken body. The thing that killed them had arranged them like decorations on a Christmas tree. I'd seen plenty of death in my time, hunting accidents, heart attacks on the trail, even a suicide or 2. But this was different. This was personal. This was something that took pleasure in what it was doing. "We need to get out of here," Moses said. His voice was barely a whisper. "We need to get help." I nodded, but before we could move, the forest around us exploded. Something massive crashed through the trees on the far side of the creek. Pine branches snapped like gunshots. The ground shook with heavy footsteps that sent vibrations through the soles of my boots. And then I smelled it. A stench like a slaughterhouse, mixed with a skunk spray and the sulfur smell of rotten eggs. "Run," I whispered. We ran. Through the rhododendron thickets, over fallen logs, down steep slopes covered with loose rocks that tried to send us tumbling into ravines. Behind us, something was crashing through the forest like a freight train, snapping trees and roaring with a sound that wasn't quite human but wasn't quite animal either. Moses was faster than me, but I kept up, driven by pure terror. We could hear it gaining on us, the footsteps getting closer, the roaring getting louder. Once I looked back and saw something dark and massive moving between the trees, but my eyes couldn't quite focus on it. It was like trying to look directly at smoke. We ran for 3 hours, taking turns Moses knew from his childhood hunts with his grandfather. Finally, we reached an old mine shaft that had been sealed up decades ago. The iron gate was rusted and broken, and we squeezed through into the darkness beyond. The creature stopped at the entrance. I could hear it breathing out there, heavy and wet like a bull with pneumonia. But it wouldn't come inside. Something about the iron in the rock was keeping it out. "We're safe," Moses panted, leaning against the stone wall. "It can't follow us in here." I was about to agree when I heard Sarah Brennan's voice again, echoing from deep in the mine shaft behind us. "Help me, Jack. Please help me. It's got my babies." Moses and I looked at each other in the darkness. Sarah Brennan was dead. I was sure of it. But her voice was calling from inside the mine, getting closer. "Jack? Moses? I'm down here. Follow my voice." That's when Moses started walking deeper into the mine. "Moses, don't!" I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. His eyes had gone glassy, like he was sleepwalking. "That's Sarah," he said in a dreamy voice. "She needs our help." "Moses, Sarah Brennan is dead. Whatever that is, it ain't her." But Moses was already walking deeper into the mine shaft, following the voice that kept calling from the darkness ahead. I had no choice but to follow him, my flashlight beam dancing off wet stone walls and rusted mining equipment. The tunnel stretched back into the mountain for maybe 50 yards before opening up into a wider chamber. Old wooden support beams creaked overhead, and somewhere in the darkness I could hear water dripping. The air smelled like metal and earth and something else, something organic and wrong. "Moses, she's not here," I called out, but my voice just echoed back at me. Moses had vanished somewhere in the dark ahead. That's when I heard the real Moses screaming. It came from back toward the entrance, high and sharp and cut off suddenly like someone had flipped a switch. I spun around and ran back through all the tunnel, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily off the walls. I reached the mine entrance just in time to see something impossible. Moses was 20 feet outside the mine, suspended in the air by something that looked like a giant hand covered in matted black fur. The thing holding him was 12 feet tall, maybe more, with arms as thick as tree trunks and eyes that glowed yellow in my flashlight beam. It was looking right at me while it slowly crushed Moses's skull like a grape. The sound Moses made will haunt me until the day I die. Not a scream, not a cry, just a wet cracking noise followed by silence. Then the thing dropped his body and picked up his ranger hat, which had fallen off when it grabbed him. The creature put Moses's hat on its own massive head and grinned at me with teeth like broken glass. Then it sat down cross-legged outside the mine entrance and began eating Moses, never taking those yellow eyes off me. I stumbled backward into the mine shaft, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. The beam flickered and went dim. The batteries were dying. In maybe an hour, I'd be sitting in complete darkness while that thing waited outside. The mine shaft only went back about 100 yards before ending in a wall of collapsed rock. I was trapped. No other way out. No radio signal this deep underground, and no chance of fighting something that could crush a man's skull with one hand. I sat down on a piece of old mining equipment and tried to think. The creature had waited 3 hours outside the mine entrance without losing patience. It could obviously mimic human voices perfectly. It was smart enough to arrange bodies like some kind of sick artist. And it was strong enough to throw a 1,000-pound horse 30 feet up into a tree. But it wouldn't enter the mine. Moses had been right about the iron keeping it out. The question was, how long would that protection last? My flashlight beam was getting weaker by the minute. Soon I'd be sitting in darkness, listening to that thing breathing outside the entrance. Waiting. That's when I remembered the emergency whistle. Every ranger carries one, a high-pitched metal whistle designed to carry for miles through mountain terrain. I'd never used mine, but it hung on a chain around my neck like a talisman. My hand closed around it, and I felt a spark of hope. Moses had said his grandmother told stories about what lived on Devil's Backbone. Maybe she'd also told stories about how to fight it. I put the whistle to my lips and blew as hard as I could. The sound that came out was sharp and piercing, echoing off the mine walls and amplifying until it sounded like a fire engine siren. From outside the entrance came a roar of pain and fury that shook dust from the ceiling. I blew the whistle again, longer this time, putting every bit of air in my lungs behind it. The creature's roar turned into something like a scream, and I heard heavy footsteps moving away from the mine entrance. It was working. Whatever that thing was, the high-pitched sound hurt it. I kept blowing the whistle as I made my way toward the entrance, pausing only to catch my breath. Each blast sent the creature further away, its roars getting fainter. By the time I reached the entrance, the forest had gone quiet again. But I could still smell that terrible stench, and I knew it was out there watching, waiting for me to stop. My lungs were burning, and my lips were numb from the whistle, but I didn't dare stop. I had maybe 10 miles of mountain terrain between me and the nearest road, and that thing could move a lot faster than I could. Then I remembered the old chapel. About 2 miles from the mine, hidden in a grove of ancient oaks, stood the ruins of a mountain chapel built by settlers in the 1800s. Most of the building had collapsed decades ago, but the stone bell tower still stood, and unless I was mistaken, the bell was still hanging up there. If a little emergency whistle would hurt that creature, a full-size church bell might be able to drive it away completely. I made my way through the forest, stopping every few minutes to blow the whistle when I heard branches breaking in the distance. The creature was following me, but keeping its distance now. Smart enough to be cautious, but too territorial to let me escape. The chapel ruins were exactly where I remembered them, covered in ivy and morning glory vines. The bell tower rose maybe 30 feet into the air, with an old rope hanging down into what used to be the sanctuary. The rope looked rotten, but it might hold my weight long enough to ring the bell. I could hear the creature moving closer, circling the chapel like a wolf around a campfire. Time was running out. I grabbed the rope and pulled with everything I had. The first ring was weak, just a muffled clang that barely carried past the ruins. But the sound sent the creature into a frenzy. It roared and crashed through the trees, getting closer with each second. I pulled the rope again, harder this time. The bell rang out clear and strong, echoing off the ridge walls like thunder. The creature's roar turned into a scream of agony, and I heard it retreating back into the deep woods. For the next 4 hours, I rang that bell continuously. My arms felt like they were going to fall off. My hands were bloody from the rough rope, but I didn't stop. Each ring sent waves of sound rolling across Devil's Backbone, and with each ring, the creature's cries got fainter. Finally, as the sun was setting, I heard one last howl of defeat from somewhere deep in the mountains. Then silence, real silence this time, with birds singing and insects buzzing and wind rustling through the leaves. It was over. I was found 3 days later by a search team sitting beside the chapel bell with my hair turned white as snow. The doctors said it was shock, but I knew better. Some things you see change you down to your bones, and there's no going back from that. The official report listed Moses Whitehawk's death as a bear attack. The Brennan family was listed as missing, presumed dead, in a hiking accident. The strip mining operation that had been disturbing Cherokee burial sites near Devil's Backbone was shut down due to unstable geological conditions. I couldn't work in the deep woods after that. Something about being surrounded by trees made my skin crawl and my heart race. I transferred to a desk job and spent my remaining years warning other rangers about the importance of respecting sacred sites and old burial grounds. But sometimes, during hunting season, when the mountains are full of visitors, I still hear reports of strange sounds coming from Devil's Backbone. Hunters who swear they heard something massive crashing through the forest. Campers who found their sites destroyed by something that left 20-inch footprints. And every October, when the leaves turn red and the first frost touches the ridges, I remember Moses Whitehawk's last scream and the way that creature wore his hat while it fed. The mountains keep their secrets, but sometimes those secrets hunt back. My name is Jackson Mountain Heart, and this is what really happened on Devil's Backbone in October of 1962. I'm telling you this story not to scare you, but to warn you. Some places are best left alone, some things are best left undisturbed, and some sounds in the deep woods are best not investigated. The Cherokee knew this. My grandfather knew this, and now you know it too. Just remember, if you're ever camping in the Virginia mountains and you hear someone calling for help in the darkness, make sure it's really someone who needs help. Because sometimes the thing doing the calling is the very thing you should be running from.